supporting you in your dog parenting journey. The Dynamic Dog Owner with Debbie Potter. Hello and welcome to The Dynamic Dog Owner. I hope you've had a wonderful week being dynamic with your dog and your dog parenting journey. You will know that this podcast is all about supporting you, the dog parent. And today I'm going to talk about a little experience I had when I was on holiday, because I think it helps look at things from a slightly different perspective, maybe. So I was recently on holiday in Norfolk, super duper dog friendly, lovely dog friendly beaches. And when I was on the beach, my dog barked in another dog's face. And I wasn't bothered about it. I'll tell you about why. Because a lot of people will go, what do you mean you weren't bothered about it? The reason I wasn't bothered about it is because I can explain it and I can understand it. And I think a lot of us, when we're out and about with our dogs, feel terribly guilty about how our dog behaves. And we instantly think we have to tell our dog off if they don't do that social norm of being super duper polite. But sometimes there's a reason for it. And obviously I see a whole situation rather than just one element. So yeah, my dog barking in somebody, or not really somebody, but another dog's face. It's not overly polite, but the other dog wasn't being very polite to him. He just looked like he was being polite, which I know sounds really strange. So let me explain the scenario. And you may well have found yourself in similar. So one of my dogs is young. And he is a little bit barky and he's a little bit nervous. He comes across being confident because he's quite shouty about it, but he's a nervous barker. And if something spooks him or he's a bit unsure about something, he barks at it. And it's getting reduced less and less every time he gets older. And because of his barking tendency, I've been very worried about letting him off the lead, purely because I know he can get himself into trouble. Because if he is suddenly spooked by something and barks at it, and if it's a person, obviously it's not going to go down very well, is it? Equally he's been very distracted as a dog, so his journey to being off lead has been quite a long one. So he had spent a lot of time off the lead actually, and I'm super duper proud of him. And he's been so polite with every dog he met, so polite. Really, really proud of him in terms of all his interactions. He was very, very, very polite mannered. Didn't try and play with any dogs, just had them a little sniff and then moved on. Didn't really need to be called away. He interrupted it himself, which really, really pleased. All of our training over the last 3 years has really come together. But I am a little bit conscious that when I do see another dog coming, I'm not happy to test it yet. And I still just pop him back on a long line. He can be free to act as naturally as he would like to, but there is always that little safety net for me. So, we were walking along the beach and I'm quite good at spotting where people are and who's coming into my environment, so that I can put Fred on the lead when I would like to and when I feel that I'm entering a situation where he might not succeed. And there's a lovely little bit, and where the sea comes in, there's a little sort of almost like a channel between the seawall and rocks, and it's probably about 5 meters wide. And the sun was out and it was beautiful. And I was like, oh, there's nobody on the beach. This is lovely. Fred was still off lead. And all of a sudden I saw a dog walking through that little gap. I was like, oh, whoops, I didn't see them. They were camouflaged by the rocks and the sun. So I called him back to me, popped him on the lead. Absolutely fine. We were a bit too close to be able to avoid them, because I like to give people a wide berth, because obviously I don't necessarily want my dog to say hello to everybody they meet, and I don't want to enter into situations where they're going to fail. And I recognised this dog because I'd seen him on the beach the previous day. And I wasn't impressed by his behaviour, which I know sounds really strange, but he wasn't doing anything. But I'd noticed from the day before that his owners just walked along the beach and let him do his own thing, which is fine. He was a very polite dog. He didn't run off. He wasn't as close to them as I would have liked for my own dogs, but that's me having high standards. But I did notice that when he saw another dog, he would stop, stand dead still and stare at it. And the owners didn't recognise that and didn't call him away or do anything about it. They just carried on walking, and eventually the dog would catch up with them. So I'd already clocked them and gone, oh, I think that's that couple. And I didn't like that body language yesterday. So I was like, we're just going to give a little bit of space. So I popped Fred on the long line And there's a little sort of tide was going out, so there's a little gap but the other side of the rocks. So we went into that gap, and I thought, because I know if my dogs are in the water playing with a ball or throwing stones into the water, that then go into the water to try and retrieve them, even though they can't because they're stones and they sink, obviously, they're busy and they're going to ignore the other dog completely. So that was I knew I couldn't get any further away from them. So that's what we did. We went down behind the rocks. The other people could see what we had done. They could see that we were entertaining our dogs. They could see that we'd put one on a lead, but they carried on walking. They didn't make an effort to put their dog on the lead or to encourage their dog to them or to give us any space at all. And obviously then I'm stuck. There's nowhere I can really go. So you can then just have to grin and bear it, don't you? And go, well, what will be, will be. So my dogs are happily playing in the water. Then they carried on going, and their dog all of a sudden was right behind the rocks, or right, literally within like 3 meters of us, stood staring. And it was a very strange dog, because it literally just stood and stared. My dogs hadn't noticed, and all of a sudden they did. And obviously Fred was like, what are you? So they went over to say hello, because he had entered into their space, which is fair game. You know, I won't let my dogs go into somebody else's space, but if someone comes into ours, fair game, you can interact. Fred went over, and the dog stood completely still, like a statue, not moving, not doing anything. And Fred found it a little bit bizarre, because he was like going over, going, oh, hi, wiggly, wiggly me. I'm wagging my tail. I'm all loose and goosey and like, woohoo. And this dog was like a statue. So Fred went, what on earth? Barked at it, because he was unsure. And the dog still stood exactly still without moving. I mean, it's a bit weird. So I said, Fred, come over here. So he came back to me, went to throw some stones in the water again, and he went, hang on, I'm still not sure about this. The dog still stood staring. The owners had carried on walking and didn't really give us any attention at all. And Fred went back and did the same thing and went, I don't know about you. Woof, 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 right in his face. The dog carried on staring like a statue. So I called Fred back again and was like, right, come here. We're not going to go near it now. Because I know with Fred, if I tighten his lead, it makes it worse, because he does not like tight leads. I talk about it loads in class, but it's all about the tension on the lead. They carried on walking. And I think after the second bark, they actually called their dog back and he went. Now, most people would see that my dog was incredibly rude, aggressive, and a bad dog. But I look at the situation very, very differently. Fred was responding to a rude dog. So let's look at the situation, because I can understand where people, if they didn't know what they were looking at, and the other people probably also said that dog was a bad dog, because he barked. But what they were failing to look at was the whole situation. And I look at the whole situation. And the point of this podcast is to encourage you to look at things from all perspectives, not just one. So, obviously, let's start this analysis. So, for example, first of all, the dog was giving off really weird body language. His owners obviously weren't aware of body language. So they didn't understand that could be seen as being incredibly rude to another dog. And it can obviously threaten another dog and make another dog feel scared. So that's one. So I believe, in my opinion, that the other owners should be a little bit more aware of their dog's very strange body language, because I have simply never seen a dog do that before. Not to even do a thing. It was very, very strange, very odd situation. It was literally like a statue of a stone dog, stood up, looking, no tail wag, no flick of an ear, nothing. But they should have encouraged their dog to move away. So secondly, in my opinion, they should have obviously responded to the fact that my dog was on a lead. I had put my dog on a lead when we realised we were close to them. They ignored that. So am I in the wrong? Maybe, maybe not. It's 50-50. But they should have put their dog on a lead politely, because I'd put mine on a lead. Then they should have, maybe they weren't looking or paying attention, but they should have, we were walking directly towards each other, they should have noticed that we moved off of the path to give them space, which is again another signal that says, my dogs don't really want to interact with yours, thanks. But again, they didn't interrupt the situation and call their dog over. Yes, in hindsight, I could have turned around and walked the other way on the beach, but then they'd be following us. And at some point we would have had to turn around and go back towards them. So I'm not sure how else I could have managed the situation other than perhaps shortening Fred's lead up. But I believed we'd had enough space between them. I didn't realise that their dog had then come over right very close to us. So I could have handled it differently. But I think I made the right choice for my dogs at that time. So then obviously, and I know my dog is startled by weird things in his environment. So I can understand why he then went, oh, there's a dog, and went over to say hello. The dog had come into our space. So for me, that's fair game. But the dog offered no body language, no communication. So as I said, it was literally like a statue. It didn't move. It didn't wag a tail. It didn't flick anything. There was no communication whatsoever. Normally dogs offer something. You've probably seen when dogs say hello to each other, they either swish their tails ever so slightly, depending on not always a happy wag, but sometimes it's a nervous wag, sometimes it's a tucked in wag, sometimes it's a big, tall, sort of intimidating wag. Usually they flick their ears or their bodies move ever so slightly, which is all communication for the other dog to read. So there was no communication for Fred to read and go, what do you want? There was nothing to say, hi, I'm a friendly dog. There was nothing to say, I feel a bit awkward. There was nothing to say, I'm aggressive. It was an absolute blank canvas. And that confused Fred. So Fred is used to living in a house full of dogs, and he is really good at reading communication. If one of my dogs says, no, please don't do that, he goes, okay. If another dog gives a slight body language, he can respond to it. If one of my dogs gives a little signal to say, I'm not comfortable with that, Fred, he moves away. So he is very good at reading body language. So the blank canvas, in my opinion, confused Fred and went, I don't know what to do with this. And then he had a choice. He said, do I run away while this weird thing is staring at me? Do I try and say, please leave me alone? Or do I simply just stare back at him? And obviously he went for I'm going to try and scare him away because that was really odd. So he felt strange. Therefore, I don't mind that my dog barked at him. I know Fred is not aggressive. He's not an aggressive dog. He has very good communication. He's he would defend himself for sure if a dog started on him, but he has very good communication skills, which some dogs don't, and some dogs, can improve. His can always be improved, don't get me wrong, but he generally does have good communication skills. So if the other dog had given a calming signal, so given a little twitch or a flick of a tail or changed his body language slightly, Fred would have probably gone, okay, that's okay, and would have, maybe responded to that and then carried on away. It wouldn't have happened. If the other owners had been watching the situation and called the dog away, it probably wouldn't have happened. But obviously that's if, buts, maybes. It did happen. Sometimes we then end up beating ourselves up about that and feel really bad because our dog barked at somebody. But when you look at the whole situation, you can start to analyse the reasons for all of the behaviour and see it from both sides of the coin. Now, the other dog could have just frozen because he's a nervous dog, which I completely get because Rem does that. Rem is a nervous dog. He hits the deck and he freezes until another dog walks past him. But the difference is I know where his boundaries are and I recognise when it's about to happen. I make sure I'm always far enough away from dogs. He does it when he's walking head on, so I never walk head on towards the other dog when he's off lead. And I can recognise the signs that he's starting to feel uncomfortable. As soon as I say his name, he comes back to me and we re-engage with each other and he goes, oh, that was really weird. So I can interrupt him. I don't let him, where possible, carry on with that stalk that he does and stare at other dogs. But obviously this other dog did. So that there is obviously, that dog could have been nervous, the other dog could have been a bit wary, it could have just been really nosy, because he seemed to do it at most dogs he saw. Now, I personally don't think that my dog did anything wrong in this situation. He was communicating and trying to communicate in a very odd situation. Do I think the other dog did something wrong? No, because he was doing what he needed to do in a situation to feel comfortable. But the difference is the owners didn't respond. The owners weren't helping their dog out. So think of situations that you've been in. Can you look at it from both perspectives and see why it happened? Because there's always a why. And sometimes we are very, very quick to blame our dogs and shout at our dogs and tell them off, which is not what I did with Fred. I said, it's okay, babe. I know that was a really weird situation. Don't worry about it. And I helped him de-stress afterwards. We didn't see that dog again, so it was fine. But it's a lesson to kind of help you realise that inadvertently your dog can get themselves into tricky situations. If that other dog had responded to Fred's bark rather than just standing there doing nothing, they could have had a little argument. They could not have. They could have just gone shouted at each other and then both been recalled away. It could have been prevented. It could have been prevented, and that's the main thing. And it's all about body language. Body language for me is the most important thing that anyone can learn. Most people are unaware of how their dog is communicating and what it means to other dogs and how it can be misinterpreted, or how they should how their body language is preempting what's going to happen next. It's, for me, the lesson that everybody should learn. Reading body language, because then you can understand how a situation has sort of transpired and how else it could have gone and what both dogs were saying to each other. So this is my little story as to why I didn't tell my dog off for barking at another dog, because it was fair in a very, very awkward situation. Very, very awkward in terms of how dogs communicate. And it's okay for dogs to express emotion. We tend to always then tell dogs off because they barked or were rude. In human eyes, a dog should not bark. A dog should be perfectly well behaved. It should be friends with everybody it meets. Realistically, that's not going to happen. And as long as your dog is polite about that, I think that's okay. Yes, it's a situation I would prefer to avoid, but I know I did everything I could to avoid the situation, so I don't feel too bad about that. And Fred responded to a situation that was very, very strange. And it just teaches me that we need to work on being around dogs that don't communicate, so that he can learn what to do when dogs do not communicate with him the way he is used to, and help him out a little bit more. So it gives me a lesson, but it also gives me an explanation as to why this happened. And the main take home is, when your dog has an encounter that maybe doesn't go perfectly, look at the reasons why. Look at what happened. Look at what could have changed, what could have improved, and whether it was probably 50-50, not just the loud dog that gets told off and is a bad dog, because the other one was doing rude stuff. Yes, he was quiet, and yes, he looked like a perfect dog just standing and staring, but he was being a little bit impolite by the way he was standing and staring. But obviously the one who shouts the loudest gets into trouble. We all know that, right? If you're going to kick off, you're the one that's in trouble, not the one that provoked you. So look at a whole situation. Look at what your dog's doing and how it can look to other dogs. And look at what other dogs are doing and how your dog might respond to it. And most of all, look into canine body language. I will attempt to do a podcast episode on body language, but it'll be really, really difficult because it's very visual, and obviously this is very talky. But I will attempt it because it is incredibly, incredibly important. And I think it's a game changer for every dog owner to learn about body language. So hopefully that has been useful to let you know, A, my dogs aren't perfect, and that it's good to analyse a whole situation so that you can see it from every single aspect, not just from one view, and to see how situations transpire, see how they end up the way they are, and most importantly, just because your dog barks, it doesn't mean they are in the wrong. It doesn't mean they've done anything wrong. It can do, obviously, but not always. Hopefully you found this useful. If you want to tell us about your dog experiences, head over into our Facebook community group, Potter Paws Dog Training Community, where we would love to hear about them and help you analyse them a little bit more. Have a great week. Thank you for listening to The Dynamic Dog Owner with me, Debbie Potter. See you next time.